All right. Society of the Sacred Pixel, please welcome Anny Chen. Annie's going to be speaking to us about building an illustration portfolio for children's books. Welcome, Anny.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. All right. Yeah. So I was looking at some of the previous learning sessions, and a lot of them seem to be very design focused. So my session may be a little bit different from what you're used to hearing today, but my goal is to just give you an idea of what a children's illustrator does and how one might approach breaking into this industry as a beginner, starting specifically with building a strong and market-ready children's illustration portfolio. But first, a little bit more about me. So I'm Anny Chen. I'm a children's illustrator based in Paris, France, though I've also lived and worked in Taipei, New York City, and San Francisco. I'm a self-taught illustrator, so I never went to school for illustration. I did take some online art classes and I read a ton of books. But yeah, mostly self-taught. And I've actually been through quite a few career changes. So children's illustration is my fourth one. Before I became a freelance illustrator, I actually worked as a graphic designer for almost a decade. And I've worked in-house before as well, in-house graphic design. What else can I share? Right. I am represented now by Advocate Art Agency. So it's one of the larger international illustration agencies that specializes in children's books, illustration, and art licensing. And this news actually just broke earlier this week. So I just joined. I'm excited to be joining their team and seeing how they can help me grow my illustration career. And so if anybody has questions about what it's like to join an illustration agency, I'm happy to answer them too in the Q&A. Thank you. Lastly, I also want to highlight that my career path into children's illustration has been this really long, windy process with lots of starts and stops along the way. So it means it probably took me longer than most people to hit certain career milestones. But at the same time, I think it's this struggle that has allowed me to really understand what are the unique pain points and challenges that self-taught artists tend to face when they're making this type of midlife career change into children's illustration. And in fact, because I struggled so much, I decided to share a lot of what I had learned in this process in order to help other artists. So in 2024, I started posting consistently on LinkedIn and sharing drawing tips and career insights about working in the children's illustration industry. And as my following grew, people started asking me to compile all of my tips into a single guidebook. And so I actually self-published that last year in May. And as you'll see, it's the same title as my talk today. So a lot of what I'm sharing today comes directly from my guidebook. And outside of that, I also mentor other artists one-on-one, doing portfolio reviews and sort of longer 2 to 4 month mentorships. Okay. So before we go into how to build a children's illustration portfolio, I figured it might be helpful to first define what a children's illustrator is. And so that's just simply someone who illustrates artwork for the children's market. And I find that people outside of the industry often assume that that's only children's books, but actually we can work on a lot of different other formats. And we can also have clients, a lot of different other clients outside of the publishing industry as well. So just to give you some quick examples, if you're a children's illustrator, you could be hired to illustrate games or puzzles. You can be hired to create a character design for a children's animation series. Also, in terms of clients outside of publishing, for example, you could work for a nonprofit whose core mission is around helping children, or even help pediatricians and therapists who need artists to illustrate their therapy aids or workbooks. So really, it's quite broad. And that's why I like to call myself a children's illustrator and not a children's books illustrator, because I don't want to just limit myself to one format. So just to give you an example, here is a project that I worked on that got published last year with a French publisher here called Éditions ou des Enfants. And I was commissioned to illustrate this box set of flashcards created to help parents teach their babies French Sign Language. So I got to illustrate like 50 babies, and it was just a really fun and adorable project to work on. And here is a really quick snapshot of a few illustration commissions I've done in the past for various children's magazines. So there aren't just books, but also magazines that you can work on, editorial work. So here's some stuff that I did for Scholastic and Story Monsters Inc., and also Friend Magazine in the US. And then I've also often collaborate directly with authors who are either self-publishing or who are trying to pitch their manuscripts to publishers. And so they hire illustrators to help illustrate their pitch. And so this is a sample spread from a picture book that I collaborated on with a children's author last year. And she's been in the process of pitching her book to various indie publishers. And we actually just got word earlier this week that we might be getting an offer, but it's still a little bit too soon, but fingers crossed. So yeah, this is just an example of something that I've done with a children's author. And I also try to illustrate and write my own picture books. So this is an example of a personal project that I started working on last year. It's roughly a story about this oddball friendship with between a girl and her dog. And I'll be showing even more examples of my work later in my talk. So, but if you're curious, you can always visit my website, and I'll share a link to that at the end. Okay. And so finally, before we start talking about how to build your portfolio, I thought I'd also just address like who it's for. So like in any creative field, obviously your portfolio is there to help you land paid work. In children's illustration, though, there are typically two types of people you're pitching your portfolio to. So number one is agents. So basically an art agent is supposed to do the work of marketing your portfolio and finding clients on your behalf. But in return, they get a percentage of every commission you earn. And a lot of beginners, when they're starting out, they feel like that's their first step, is that they need to sign with an agency, because agents can help you open certain doors in publishing that would be harder for you to do on your own. And there are a lot of pros and cons to being represented by an agency, which we can delve into further in the Q&A. But it's helpful to know that even though you have an art agent, most illustrators still need to do a lot of hustling on their own and marketing on their own as well. So, and then obviously number two is potential clients. So if you don't have an agent, then you need to do all that marketing work yourself. And that includes cold emailing, following up, reviewing and signing contracts, and building relationships directly with clients over time. So very much like a freelance designer. And in the publishing world, the clients who you're interfacing with are often editors, art directors, or art buyers. So how do you build a strong and marketable children's illustration portfolio? I like to tell beginners to make a really good pizza. And what do I mean by that? So what I've learned is that your portfolio is like a pizza, and there are three components to it. You've got technique, which is the dough. You've got style, which are your toppings. And finally, you've got voice, which is your secret sauce. So let's first start with technique. Like in any creative field, these are the basic skills that you need to master in order to be hired for the job. And they're also the skills that require some training, whether that's at school or if you're self-taught like I am. Technique is basically those 10,000 hours that you have to put in order to become a master or an expert in your field. And I just want to point out here that technique isn't the same as style. And that's something that I actually learned the hard way. So I'll elaborate on that a little bit further in my talk, but just keep that in mind that technique and style are two very different things. In children's illustration, there are 4 core skills that you need to show in your portfolio. And the first one is obviously you need to know how to draw children. It seems obvious, but you'll be surprised by the number of portfolios I've seen that barely show any kids in them. So obviously you need to know how to draw children. And in this section of my talk, I'm just going to be sharing some screenshots of diagrams that come directly from my guidebook, where I share some basic drawing tips that help beginners master this skill. So for example, on this slide, it's actually one of my favorite tips that I wish someone had told me at the start of my career. It's called visual weight marble theory. And it's just really a fancy way to describe basically how you can easily age a character's face up or down by playing with this proportion or spacing between the eyes and the nose. And so hopefully you can see here in the diagram, basically the idea is that the more spaced out the eyes are, like farther apart, and the nose, when it sits in the middle, the younger your character is going to look. And as you shorten that distance between the eyes and the nose starts to drop, the character starts to look older. And it's a really simple trick that, like I said, I wish someone had told me earlier on, because I find that a lot of beginners struggle with this. Oftentimes they don't know how to draw a character that looks young and often end up looking sort of like an adult head on a child's body. So this is an example of a tip that I share with beginners often. And then another one is obviously head to body ratio, knowing how to draw children with the right proportions. And again, I want to note here too that in our field, it's not important to draw to draw things realistic. So obviously none of these are anatomically correct. For children's books, it's really, you can get away with a much more stylized, exaggerated, or playful look. And then obviously another part of knowing how to draw children is knowing how to draw lots of different character expressions. So this is, again, an example where I share just like a cheat sheet for how you could draw various emotions. And it's also important to note that in your portfolio, you want to show a range of emotions. So not just sort of those basic ones of happy, sad, angry, but, kind of the more subtler ones of, maybe like embarrassed or hopeful or even pensive. So all of this is important to show your range as an illustrator. Okay. And so skill number 2 is also knowing how to create a consistent character, because when you're a children's illustrator, especially if you're doing books, you need to be able to draw the same character consistently across a 32-page book. And so this is why character sheets like these ones from my portfolio are important to show. And basically what you're trying to show art directors and agents is that you have the skills to make a character come alive on the page. And then the third core skill is narrative illustration. So our job as children's illustrators is storytelling through images. And a lot of times people assume our job is just to draw what's written in the text. But the really good children's books are the ones where the pictures tell you more than what's explicitly said in the text. Or we can create like an element of surprise for the reader when the text and the images say two different things. And that always creates a really fun tension in the book. And a lot of narrative illustration is also knowing how to draw a scene where multiple characters interact with one another, because that's when a story has the possibility to unfold. And I like to think of our job as almost like movie directors, where we get to cast the actors in the story and direct the scene visually on the page. And so knowing how to illustrate emotions or creating a mood is like a huge part of this, as well as building a believable world for your characters. So as artists, as picture book artists, our job is to add all those little visual details on the page that kids seem to always notice, but parents don't see it, or adults don't see it when they read the book. And it's those little details or clues that help add another layer to what's not being said in the words. And that makes the whole picture book experience that much richer for the young audience. And then skill number 4 is story pacing. And also just understanding the picture book format. So picture books are typically 32 pages or 16 spreads. Sometimes you have shorter books that are 24 pages. And then you also have board books for babies, which can be as short as 6 to 8 pages. But in general, 32 is standard. And this diagram shows you the page plan for a 32-page picture book. So usually in the picture book process, the first step is nailing down the character design. And then once we have a character, then we go into storyboarding or thumbnails. And part of that process is creating a page plan like this one, where you take the author's text and you start to break it up, and you decide where the page turns are going to happen, and basically how the story is going to flow visually from page to page. And I always like to compare story pacing to almost like composing music, because the visuals become almost like the score of a movie, in the sense that we can ramp up the pace or slow it down depending on the types of visuals that we're creating on each page. And it's important to switch up the visuals so that the pacing stays exciting and interesting for the reader, because our goal is to get them to keep turning the pages and to want to keep reading the book. And so when I say switching up the visuals, what I'm talking about specifically is that in children's books, you have 3 types of visuals. So you have double page spreads, single pages, and spot or vignette illustrations. And so the most common type is what's called a double page spread, which I'm sure a lot of you know as designers. And that's like a full bleed spread like this one. And they're really great for setting the stage of a story or capturing like a very dramatic, action-packed or emotional moment in the text. But because they have such visual impact, it's important to mix them up with other types of illustrations. Otherwise, they start to lose their visual punch. And it can be kind of boring, actually, to have an entire 32-page picture book with just these big full bleed spreads. And so this is when the other 2 types of illustrations come in. So you can play with single page artwork, which is what you see here on the right-hand side of the spread. And they're often either paired with another page that's just solid text, or they can be paired with a page like this here that's got spot illustrations or vignettes on the other side. So single page illustrations are really good for zooming in on a moment in the story. It helps to slow down the pace so the reader can kind of reflect on what's happened so far. And on the other hand, spot illustrations are really all about speeding up the pace. So you can illustrate like a rapid sequence of interactions on one page like you see here. And it's also like a great way to quickly establish a relationship between 2 characters. Okay, so the first part was about technique, and now we're going to talk about style. So for me, I like to imagine style as the toppings of your pizza because we're talking about taste. Like if I'm a pizza shop catering to different clients, I know that like an Italian margherita pizza is going to taste very different from like a Hawaiian pizza, for example. And that comes down to the toppings that I've intentionally chosen. And I often see beginners getting stuck in the finding my style phase for a very long time, because beginners often think that finding their style is sort of this purely intuitive process, like you're trying to, read this magic crystal ball. And everybody just keeps telling you to trust the process. And in fact, that kind of advice like led me to creative burnout, because I spent 2 years just making a lot of artwork without any focus or strategy. And I never found my style that way. So I'm hoping I can help demystify this process a little bit for you all today. So what do I mean by style? Like, what is it? What I've learned is that style is simply making choices and then sticking to your choices. And that means picking your niche. So I know you've probably heard this a million times, but as a children's illustrator, it's really important to choose your target market and niche down and get as specific as possible. And once you've chosen your niche, to actually stick with it long enough to get good at it. A lot of beginner artists, when they start out, they're always afraid to pick a niche because they feel like it's going to limit them forever. But I find that picking your niche actually is really important because it signals to clients that, like, number one, you understand how their industry works. And 2, they can trust you to deliver a consistent style for whatever project they're hiring you for. So when it comes to children's illustration, like, how do you find your niche? First off, the best thing to do is to actually go out and see what's being published right now. And that means like visiting bookstores or libraries, or even just going on a publisher's website to see what they're putting out there. And if you do that, you're going to start to see what's trending, what are like the art trends. But also you start to understand how clients hire. And so here is a screenshot actually that I took of Penguin Random House's kids catalog. And I've circled the categories on the bottom because that's your clue there for what those niches are. So in children's illustration, markets are broken down by age group and format. And these categories and examples are taken directly from Penguin Random House's site, but they're pretty standard across the board. This is how most publishers hire for their catalogs. So you've got board books, ages 0 to 2, picture books, ages 3 to 7, early readers, ages 5 to 8, chapter books were sometimes what we call middle grade, which is ages 7 to 12, and young adult novels or graphic novels from ages 12 to 18. And within each category, the art requirements and therefore the illustration style are very different. So if you want to find work in each category, you need to put together a very different kind of portfolio for each one. And I know it's always hard when I tell an artist that they can only do one thing. So what I like to say is try to focus short term and build range long term. Like you can do it all, but just not all at once. And I like to think of niches as almost like Lego blocks. So they can ultimately connect to one another in your portfolio, but each one has to be able to stand on its own. And that means showing at least 10 to 15 solid pieces for each niche if you're going to include it in your portfolio. And if you're going to create a portfolio with multiple niches, then organize them as separate pages on your website, or at least have them clearly labeled so that a potential client, when they land on your website, it's really easy for them to navigate and find what they're looking for. Okay, so we've covered technique and we've covered style. Now I want to talk a little bit about voice. So I like to think of voice as that secret sauce that binds technique and style together to make a cohesive portfolio. And I feel like right now it's good for me to share. I wanted to share this anecdote actually from my friend Adam Ming, who is also a children's illustrator. And early in Adam's career, he was pitching to a lot of art agencies. And one day, one agent wrote back, I'm not feeling a connection to the illustrations. Cats. And for us in the industry, this type of feedback is always the hardest because it's so harsh and it's vague. Like you don't really know what am I supposed to do with that? What does that mean? I'm not feeling it. I don't, it's very subjective. And I think that what they're pointing out to, and that's what Adam also learned, is what's missing is authenticity. So as Adam has shared with me, sure, I ticked the boxes, but there wasn't enough me in the illustrations. And so what I've learned is when you have two highly polished professional portfolios in front of you that both tick the boxes of technique and style, then oftentimes the thing that will tip the balance one way or the other is that third important ingredient, which is your voice as an artist. And that's like what makes you unique. And it is something that will take you some time to figure out, but I'm hoping to share one way that can help you speed up that process. And that is to keep a sketchbook and draw on it every day. So artists often talk about needing inspiration to work, but those of us who've been doing it for a while, I think we learned that it has less to do with inspiration and more about just creating or building a creative habit. And that means, drawing every day, keeping a sketchbook and doing a lot of drawing every day. And how does this translate to your portfolio? So in January 2024, I started a daily drawing habit. And it was actually, it had started out as a daily drawing challenge hosted by my friend Adam, who used the hashtag 10-minute artist. And the idea was that you could manage to draw every day for as little as 10 minutes at a time. And fast forward, and I've been doing this daily drawing now for 2 years, more than 2 years now. And I've filled 6 sketchbooks and I'm working through my 7th one. So there are many benefits to drawing every day, but today I'm only going to focus on one, and that is you'll start to notice patterns. Like daily drawing is a record of your attention, and I find that no two people will ever observe life the same way. So if you want to find your voice as an artist, it's great to note down first how you already pay attention in real life. Like what sparks your curiosity enough to want to pick up a pencil and put it down on paper. And so for me, some of the patterns that I started to notice were like dogs, grumpy kids, humor, like funny and silly things, and food. And hopefully you can see, in my artwork here, like how my artistic voice emerged directly from those patterns that had surfaced in my sketchbooks and from my daily drawing. So just to conclude my talk, when you combine all three, technique, style, and voice, you will make a pizza that only you can make. And that's what will get your children's illustration portfolio noticed and eventually hired. So that's the end of my presentation. And here are also some ways that we can stay in touch.
All right. Thank you so much, Annie. That was so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So everybody start getting some questions in there. I wanted to ask, let's see, I have some notes here. Oh, so can you talk a little bit about your collaboration, like what you receive from an agent or a publisher, and what kind of collaboration you might do with an agent or an author? Like, do you get approvals for things like character designs before moving forward? Just any general talk you can do.
Yeah. I mean, I can talk a little bit more about like sort of that workflow from. So I think it's actually important first to know, I think for designers, because I used to be a graphic designer in tech, actually. And I went into children's illustration very naive because I was used to like very fast timelines. And I learned the hard way that the publishing world moves very slowly. So just to give everybody an idea, for example, last year, I signed a contract for a children's book with an indie publisher. And I signed that contract in November or end of November. And I've started working on it. And this book isn't going to come out until fall of this year. So it usually takes about 1 whole year from contract to actually like a physical book out in the world in a bookstore or something. That whole cycle takes 1 year. And for children's like for the part of like the part where you're actually working on the artwork, a children's book tends to take about 5 months. I would say 5 to 6 months. And in that process, you get the author's text. The funny thing is, if you're working with a publisher, a lot of times you never even meet the author. Like it's a totally, so you're actually engaging with the art team. So you're engaging really just with the art director. And so we get the manuscript, we read through it. There's usually the first part is character design. So you're doing the character design. That can take about a month sometimes to nail it down between the feedback, the revisions, and all of that. And then afterwards, you're doing the storyboarding and the thumbnailing. And then from there, once the storyboard and the thumbnails have been approved, then you go into the black and white interior sketches. So there you're sketching out the entire book, and you're doing it as close to, like clean, finished lines as possible. That goes through revisions, feedback. And then once those have been approved, then you go into full color. And sometimes within the coloring phase, you're sharing, you're always in contact with the art director, getting their feedback. Sometimes you can share color roughs first before you go into the fully polished artwork. And then also there's the cover. So you have the interior pages, the title page, and then you also have the book cover, which is a lot of work too, because that's oftentimes the most important part, because that's how the marketing team gets people to want to buy the book, right? Is you need to have a really strong book cover. So yeah.
Got it. Thank you. And are you working or are you submitting digital pieces or physical or both?
So I work purely digitally. So all my files are digital, but there are a lot of children's books illustrators who still work analog with traditional medium. And in fact, I'll say that now with the rise of AI, I think that they may be that their analog style is actually even more desirable now. The thing is, the analog, it takes longer, right? So like someone like me, when I go to full color, I can work a lot faster, and it's also a lot easier to make changes. If there are revisions that come back, it's very easy for me to make those changes in Procreate, or at least it's easier than, say, if you were doing like a full picture book with watercolors or gouache or some other traditional medium.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, who's got some questions for Annie? You can just jump in.
I got a question. Hey, it's Chen. You mentioned you started working as a graphic designer in tech, and then you shifted to children's book illustrator. What's the story about like your first client? How did you like get your first client?
In children's illustration?
Yes.
Um, Oddly enough, through LinkedIn. So I'm one of the rare artists who spends this much time on LinkedIn, I think, because Instagram just wasn't working for me. And so, like I said, starting in 2024, I started posting a lot on LinkedIn. And I got a lot of I guess I got people were engaging with my posts, and because of that, people started to discover my work. And I also like LinkedIn because you can see who the art directors and the editors are. So oftentimes, as artists, when you're on Instagram, you're posting your artwork and you're using all the hashtags. For example, like Kidlit Illustrator, or there's a thing in our community that's called Kidlit Art Postcard. So that was created actually by an artist during COVID, where we could no longer really send physical postcards because nobody was working in their offices anymore. And so she created this hashtag on Instagram. So you have a lot of artists who are constantly posting on Instagram, hoping to get noticed by an art director. But the thing is, because there's so much, you kind of get lost in the sea of artists. So that's why I went on LinkedIn, because I also could track down the people. I could sort of do my research and be like, oh, well, that, like, put a face, to an actual person in the publishing house. But anyway, long story short, that's how I got my gig. But it was actually, my first gig was actually a children's animation writer who had seen my work on LinkedIn, and she was trying to pitch a children's animation series. And so she hired me to do these character designs for her. So that was my first gig. And then afterwards, before I had signed with Advocate Art Agency, I was previously with another smaller boutique agency. And through my former agent, she had gotten me quite a few gigs doing children's illustration magazines. So having an agent does help you get work.
Thank you. That was very inspiring.
Thank you. I'm glad.
Thank you, Yabuz. Unati, could you ask your question?
I can see in the chat here. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Can you please read? I'm so nervous.
Oh, sure. I'll read it. So Unati is asking me how I got connected with Advocate Art Agency. That has taken me a while, actually. So how I got connected was I applied. And the thing is, with children's illustration, I always tell beginners, like, you need to just be super persistent. It's a lot of, you need to be able to stomach a lot of radio silence and rejection. And it took me a couple of years before I could get signed with like a big agency like Advocate Art. So it required building a strong portfolio, and then also submitting and following up. They had rejected me. They're part of a larger group, and they had rejected me before, but I never gave up. And, I just kept working on my portfolio, and I resubmitted. And this time around, they said yes.
I have a question. I don't know. I said, okay.
Sure, jump in.
Sorry. There might be a little noise on my end. Sorry. No, I was just wondering because I don't know how interesting this will be to other people, so apologies. But working in France, hey, honey.
Yeah.
For example, for clients and things like that, would you be working more internationally, or do you stick more with France itself? Is it easy to work internationally is my question, really, I guess.
It's the great thing about being a freelancer is you can work with clients all over the world. I actually started out mostly with clients in the US just because it's in English. It's a lot easier. And my agent was based in the US. So most of her clients are in the US. Though I last year managed to get my first French client here. So I would say it really just depends, like, what is easier for you, in terms of the language for interfacing. So for me, English made it more so that I was pitching more directly with clients either in the US or the UK just because of the language.
Thank you. It was really great. Thank you. Really interesting.
You're welcome.
Another one from me. We got Yabuz next, but Annie, can you talk about like what kind of critical feedback, like when you got rejected by the agency the first time, or what kind of critical feedback, or any kind of feedback that you get from anyone you're working with?
Yeah, that's the thing. You're lucky if you get feedback. I always tell beginners that, like, even if you get rejected, but you get feedback, that's already like a huge plus because a lot of times, like, they won't even give you feedback. When it comes to agencies, though, I like to point out that a lot of times I got rejected from agencies, not so much because my portfolio wasn't good enough, but because they already had enough artists with that style for that particular market. And so sometimes, if you go on an agency's website and you see, oh, you know what, they already have a lot of artists who are working in this market and that style is pretty similar to mine, then chances are it's not so much about the quality of your work. It's just that they don't want to hire another artist who's then going to be like competing with their existing artists. So that's one aspect to consider. But then if, for example, if you are a beginner and you're just starting out and you are getting rejected, then I find a lot of times it is those things that I pointed out in my presentation. Maybe you're not showcasing enough kid characters. You're not showing that you can draw them consistently and with emotions and expressiveness. And also you're not showing enough narrative illustration. So then it's more technical things. And then again, I do find that when you're pitching, either whether to a publisher or an agent, it's really important to do your research. So you need to spend a lot of time on their website to understand, what is their catalog, what is their style, what do they tend to publish, and do you fit in with that? And I think coming from graphic design, because like I said, I was a graphic designer for almost a decade, that was very hard for me to understand because so much of my training was to not have a style. As a designer, you're not meant to have a style because that comes, you're adapting to whatever the client needs, what makes the most sense for the client. But when it comes to illustration, you have to have a distinct style. You need to learn how to develop it.
All right, questions are coming in. Yabuz has another one.
I just want to know what's like working with an art agency. Like, maybe is there any expectations with that, or,
Yeah, that's a good question. So an art agency, it really depends too. For example, and I've had an experience with a small agency, and now like with a big one. The big one I just started, but I would say that when you work with an art agency, ideally you hope that your art agent can be your partner. And they can even be, for example, when I first started out with the smaller agency that I was with, my art agent spent like 6 months really kind of mentoring me and getting my portfolio into shape before she started pitching my portfolio to clients. So ideally, you want to have that close relationship with your agent. Now, with a larger art agency, that's harder to have because oftentimes with one agent, they're representing, 20, 30 other artists. So they're not going to be able to give you that one-on-one close attention. In terms of working with an art agency, obviously you have to know that they will take a commission. So in children's illustration, at least, the commission rate, the percentage, that an agent takes is anywhere from 25 to 35% of whatever you earn. So that's a pretty significant chunk. But in return, the idea is that they're the ones there who are marketing your portfolio. They are also ideally, if you have an agent, they have their contacts. They've spent years networking with these editors and art directors and various publishing houses. And so they're the ones who are able to get your portfolio in front of the right people, because without an agent, when you're on your own, it's possible to pitch. But like I said, it tends to be this sort of like anonymous wall, like you land on the publisher's website and it's just a submissions page and you don't know who it is on the other side. And so you're just sending it in. And like I said, it takes a very long time to hear back if ever. So oftentimes it can take 3 to 6 months before you even hear anything about your submission. So that's why an agent is helpful, because they've got that one-on-one contact with a lot of these kind of gatekeepers, we say, in the industry, and they can help you sort of break in faster. If that answers your question. They can also help you with contracts too. That's the other thing. So an agent is there to help you read through the contract, ideally fight for you, though that's not always the case either. because again, an agent, they make money when you make money. And so sometimes it's better if we just sign the contract, So, but ideally your agent is there to advocate for you.
That's a pretty cool role. Do they also have like illustrator experience themselves, like that they would know the industry?
I find the best agents who have illustration experience, I find that they're the best ones, the ones who have had illustration experience. Some of them do, some of them don't, but all of them really understand the market. Like they understand the children's books market, they understand how it works. They're also there to help point out the trends for you. So an agent will tell you, because once you have your portfolio, afterwards you need to always be freshening it up with new work, right? And as you can see, if publishing takes so long, a lot of times the work that you're working on right now isn't going to come out in a year. So during the downtimes where you're trying to make a lot of your own personal projects to keep your portfolio interesting. And an agent is there to coach you in that sense, to be like, hey, I think, you should really make a few pieces on this subject matter. This thing is trending. Like it can literally be like, for example, like axolotl, the animal, is really trending right now. And I think you should do a piece on that, so it can be like that.
Very good. I painted an axolotl. A few years ago, I was ahead of the trend, I think.
Yeah, you were like ahead of the curve. Like apparently the kids, they love the axolotls.
I'm not kidding. I listened to a podcast about toy manufacturing, and they said that was a big one a couple of years ago. If you're comfortable, Annie, could you tell us a little, like maybe what somebody new to children's illustration might expect in terms of payment for a project? Maybe a range?
I can give a range. And also it really depends on the market, like the geographic region. So it is known that the US clients tend to pay more. They pay better than in the UK and in Europe. For a children's book, we're talking like a little small indie publisher, for example, who puts out maybe like 1 or 2 titles a year. That's like $2,000 for a children's book. And then if you're a more established publishing house, you can get between the range of like $3,000 to $5,000. And then as you're more established and really like, started to be like considered like an expert, someone seasoned, that's the word I'm looking for. Then we're looking more between like $8,000 to $10,000 for a picture book.
Cool. And how many might you do a year, or like an average, or not just you, but for anyone?
Yeah, that's so hard to say. I think it's very different for everyone. But I think just again, to keep in mind the timelines, right? So if one picture book takes about 5 to 6 months, I think there are you could work on 2 books at once, though that's pretty hard. So I say probably like 3 books a year is like, 3 to 5. But in between, that's the thing. Like a lot of children's illustrators, maybe you're working on books, but in between you've got these other gigs that are happening, right? So for example, like a children's illustration magazine, like I've been commissioned for those, and those have very fast turnarounds, right? And you can knock those out sooner. So, you've got maybe a longer picture book project that's happening, but in between you've got gigs that are going on too.
Sounds like it's fun to mix things up like that, timelines and styles and things.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Like if I'm working on a picture book, like I'm actually sometimes happy to get just like a quick magazine gig because I can switch gears. Because a picture book, again, like I think, coming into this, I was a little bit naive, as a graphic designer, illustrating a 32-page picture book takes a while, and sometimes it can get a little long towards that last stretch of it. It really feels like you're running like a marathon, and it's like the last couple of miles left, to get it over the line sometimes. So
let's see. Unati has a question. I'll ask this one. How did you develop your narrative skill, and what is the thought process when doing so?
Ooh, I need my narrative skill. Well, I think for me, when I understood, there's some great books that I've read. Actually, I should share that. So one book that I think is really, really good for any children's books illustrator is this classic by Molly Bang, which is Picture This. And here I think is great just for graphic designers too, because she talks a lot about these like basic graphic design or visual principles for creating a narrative. Or how do I put this? It's more that like certain visual principles that create, like for example, here she breaks down like Little Red Riding Hood, and she deconstructs how like, color and shape and lines, how that creates a certain feeling in us just based off of basic visual principles. So this is actually very much tied to graphic design. And so understanding those and how they relate to narrative, that's one of them. And then like things like shape language, right? So understanding like, for example, triangles tend to feel sharper and rounder shapes feel softer and kinder. So all of these things were things that I learned just by reading books. And then another great resource that I had was, I don't know if you all are familiar with 3D Total Publishing, but I love this publishing house for their resources. So this book, as you can see, I bookmark it a lot. This was one of my absolute favorites. This is Fundamentals of Character Design. And that's where I learned about visual weight marble theory, for example. So books like these have been really helpful for me to develop those skills since I'm self-taught. So there's this one. And then also 3D Total Publishing also put this book, How to Be a Children's Books Illustrator, which was also a great reference to have when I was just starting out. Back to like more specifically how I began to wrap my mind around what is narrative illustration. One of them is understanding that a lot of it has to do with character interaction, because you rarely see a story that just has one character, because if it was just one character, like nothing would happen, so you need to at least have, if it's one character, then there needs to be some kind of external force. Maybe it's not another human character, but you need to have something to create conflict. Either a conflict or a relationship. That's really the crux of what any narration is, or what. So understanding that kind of helped open up for me how to create narrative illustration in any piece, even if I don't have text. I just kind of imagine one character and I imagine another character, and I just try to think, how do we play these two off of each other, and how would they interact with one another in this situation?
Very helpful. I think I've seen images from the first book that you showed.
The Molly Bang book. Yeah, it's a classic. Yeah.
Oh, really?
It's like really. It's I feel like everybody knows about this book, but also I think it's a great book just for graphic designers too, because it's a great refresher of these basic visual principles, but really applying them to narrative illustration, like how we can use those same visual principles for storytelling.
Right. And it's so stripped down that you can focus on whatever individual piece is being explained. And when you talked about the shapes, we had a toy packaging designer, and he did a similar explanation about how he might design the shape of a package for a certain type of toy versus another type of toy based on the intent and the colors and everything else. So it's always relationships. All right. Thanks, Annie. Ralph, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, just kind of curious. Who owns the artwork that you do? If it's yourself or the client or the publishing house, and other ways that you I guess kind of keep fresh and break away from illustration, like you dabble into any types of medium, kind of just to just do something different.
Yeah. So the artwork, it depends. Whether or not I own the artwork depends on the contract that you sign. So you can sign a contract that's like work for hire, which then basically means that you're signing away your rights to the artwork. Like you're almost like for the duration of that contract, like an employee of the client, and whatever you do, it's theirs. When it's done, they can make changes and all of that. That's kind of the worst kind of contract to have, but I mean, you have that. And then otherwise you can have contracts where it's almost like the publisher is essentially like licensing your artwork for the picture book for the duration of when it's going to be out in the market and being published. So generally, when you get a picture book contract, you get paid what's called an advance. And again, those were kind of the numbers I had shared earlier. And so that's the advance that gets paid to you. And oftentimes ideally it's paid in 3 installments. So you get a deposit before you even start working. You get paid, halfway through the project, and then you get paid the last third when you've finished and you've delivered all of your artwork. And on top of that advance, you can negotiate royalty rates for books. So that's like a certain percentage that you can get. And the thing is, though, as artists, once the book is out into the world, it needs to sell enough to earn back your advance before you start to get any kind of royalty check payments. That makes sense. So if, like, for example, you get paid $3,000 to illustrate a book, the book needs to make enough sales that pays back your advance before you start to see the royalties. And again, that depends on like how established you are in your career. If you're a big name children's illustrator or not, like an Oliver Jeffers, I'm sure he's got great rates, but it really depends on your experience level. And then your other question about like dabbling in other mediums or styles. So I think I shared earlier in my talk that I intentionally, I spent a really long time trying to find my style. And that was like, I spent like a long time just sort of trying everything, trying different types of illustrations. I got really kind of lost and almost burnt out because I couldn't figure out what my quote unquote style was until I understood that style really meant just like finding your niche and sticking with it. So I think since it took me so long to get there, now I'm very intentional about not changing that. So I stick really to my style as best as I can. Obviously, you're evolving. That's the thing. Like as an artist, you're always honing your craft, learning new skills. So you definitely evolve. And your technique, as you evolve your technique, your style will evolve with you. But I try to be strategic, so if I'm going to go do something and experiment with something, I may not immediately put it in my portfolio just yet. I'm very aware of where my portfolio is right now, whether it's time to add these new pieces that are maybe pushing my style a little bit differently, but not too far, So just being very strategic and intentional about it and not just sort of like the minute I feel like doing something new or different, like putting it in my portfolio right away.
Excellent. Kind of coming off that, well, we talk about combining portfolios. You said, if you're going to have multiple styles or niches, you would separate them in a portfolio. But like, do you see any downside to that? Or have you heard any feedback from other children's illustrators where it might confuse agents or publishers in terms of what they can do?
No, in fact, I mean, I think it's great if you can have multiple categories in your portfolio, but you label it very clearly, and whatever is in that category feels very cohesive and one consistent style. And then, if you've got like a board book page, and then you've got a picture book page, and then you've got like a graphic novel page, for example, I mean, that's great because that just means that you have more opportunities available out there for you. It's what you don't want, though, is for an agent or a client to land on your website and it's kind of like all mishmashed together and you only have like 2 or 3 for each niche, because then that tells them that you don't have a style or you can't do it consistently enough and they don't know what your expertise is.
Understood. Nichelle, I think we touched on this earlier, but why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I was just curious if you basically were a gig worker. That was pretty much my question, and it pretty much got answered. But I have another question. I'm working on my portfolio right now, and I have an issue because I have different kinds of projects, and my 2 main things are photography and video work. Like I have years of videos and stuff like that, and I have no clue how in the world to present it in a way where it's balanced, because the graphic design stuff, I have a handful of things, but the video stuff, I have like tons of things. Like I have a YouTube channel, so I have like tons of stuff. What would you say is the best way to handle it? Should I just sort of make one portfolio that's just the photography and just the videos, and then a whole separate one for the graphic stuff?
Yeah, I guess not knowing, not seeing it is kind of hard for me to understand. But when you say your video work, do you mean like animation or?
No, in my case, like I had done things like get ready with me kind of things, study with me kind of things. So most of the time it's the A roll is and I'm putting graphics on there. So I'm sending like inspirational quotes and things like this. And it's interspliced, like the B roll is like me taking a break, getting
Okay.
coffee, stuff like that.
Okay. So it's more like documenting your process, would you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like a vlog. It's kind of like
Yeah.
a vlog.
Yeah. And you're trying, but are you putting that in your portfolio because you want to get work like that, or you want to just add more to your, to sort of show who you are as a creative?
Basically, I'm trying to do both because like I know that the graphic stuff, there's a little bit of stuff because I've only had one internship. And a lot of my stuff is like thumbnails. Most of the work that I've done has been like thumbnails for my channel presentations. So I was trying to figure out what was the most economical and most impactful way to present it. Because, I'm thinking I can put GIFs up there of just tiny little snippets of things that I've done, or I could put stills and just explain what's going on. I don't know. I wasn't really sure where I should, what was the smartest way to go? Because most people I'm seeing aren't really doing video. So,
I guess, so for me, are you a graphic designer who's trying to get freelance work as a graphic designer, or?
Well, actually, technically, I'm a marketing person. I'm doing digital marketing. But where I come from, like, because there's so few of us, they want you to do everything.
I see. So it's hard. Okay,
yeah.
I see.
Yeah, I wanted to come in and like work on campaigns, and they're like, "Great, work on the campaign, and while you're at it, we want you to make this video, and we want you to make this logo, and we want you to make this," and like they throw a whole bunch of stuff on your plate. So to compete, I want to look a little more rounded. It's more like a generalist market instead of a niche market here.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. And that's why I go back to like when you're a designer, and that was what was so counterintuitive for me when I made this career change, because I was so used to not having like a style or be so, like a distinct niche and all of it, right? Because kind of as a graphic designer, you kind of want to adapt to whatever your client needs. And so I don't know if my advice here applies directly to you, especially as a digital market. You say marketing, right? Digital marketing is your...
Yes.
Yeah. So it could be completely different for your field. So I don't know. Okay. But my sense is always when a client comes to your website, you want it to be easy to navigate and understand very quickly what you're about. Okay. And what your goal is, like what you want to be hired for. That helps. Yeah. But somebody else may have a better answer, because I don't have much experience with digital marketing. And I do get the sense that nowadays graphic designers are being asked to do everything.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's very frustrating, because it's, we specialize in a certain skill, but we're kind of now forced to put many skills. Our like job description just gets longer and longer, at least from what I can see. Because I've been, it's been a while since I've freelanced as a graphic designer or worked in-house as a graphic designer. But my sense, looking at what's happening on LinkedIn and stuff, is that, the job description for designer keeps just getting longer and longer. You got to do everything. So that, I think, again, even if you are doing a lot of things, just figuring out a way to organize your portfolio so that it's clear between each of those things is always helpful.
Thanks, Nichelle. And Annie, can you talk a little bit more about your transition from design and what that was like, and what led to you transitioning from design to children's illustration?
Yeah, I can. So before I became a children's illustrator, I was working actually at Adobe in their in-house brand design team for about 5 years. And then I had my son, and shortly after that, COVID hit, and I was, sheltering in place and working from home with my young child. And I think I came a point in my personal, it was sort of like the personal and the career life, where I just decided I wanted a change. And so I decided to become a freelancer because I wanted to have more time actually with my kid, to be sort of the primary caretaker for him. So freelancing allowed me that flexibility. And then children's illustration came in, I think also because it just happened to be, I just had a small child. I was reconnecting with that. We were reading a lot of children's books. So I was reconnecting with that part of me that I had forgotten, that really loved children's illustration and children's books and things like that.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's nice that you could do that. We have a couple more questions, a couple more from me, a couple more from the group. So if anybody else has any left, raise your hand or get them in the chat now, because we'll be wrapping up pretty soon. Ralph, why don't you jump back in? Ralph's got another question.
Yeah, sure you've heard of Jessica Hish. You plan to
Yes.
do what she does and design your own book and publisher and do something where you're not working for someone really.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. I heard Jessica Hish, and then
Yeah. Do you plan to
do
have
the same?
your own book, or your own book out?
Well, I'm hoping to get like my own book out, but through a publisher, like not necessarily self-publish a book. Though I did self-publish my guidebook last year, but that's a digital guidebook. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us, what I see now, the trend is sort of kind of developing your own brand. I think that's what Jessica Hish is very successful at, right? So you kind of sort of develop your own brand voice as an artist, and you have more of a presence on social media, and you have a following and a community. So all of that is very cool, because then you're able to sort of branch off and try different things. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know so much if I for now, I think I want to focus on children's illustration mainly. And then I actually am more interested in teaching, because I think just all that writing that I did on LinkedIn and then my guidebook, I kind of realized that this may be more my path. And there are also a lot of children's illustrators who are like me, who do a lot of teaching as well on the side. You as an artist, as a freelance artist, you kind of have to have multiple income streams. You got to diversify, because it's just better that way. It's more stable if you can diversify.
All right. Thanks, Ralph. Thanks, Annie. And that kind of leads, I was going to ask if you had any reader interactions, if you've ever done, I know you're illustrated, but if you ever have been to any readings of your books, or done them on your own, or seen anyone or heard from any fans who've read the books. And I would extend that to your teaching and your own book on Illustrator.
Yeah, I've actually gotten a lot of engagement through my guidebook. Yeah, that I've gotten so much positive engagement. It was really unexpected, because like I said, I just was posting on LinkedIn, just, thinking I was tired of Instagram, and I was kind of blown away by the positive response. So yeah, and that actually led to people asking me to mentor them. Like I just wrapped up actually a 4-month mentorship with one of my students. That was so rewarding, that process, being able to coach an artist and help them sort of set their goals and empower them to grow and evolve. That process for me is really rewarding. So that, like I said, yeah, I'm finding that's the teaching part is really cool. And then, yeah, I mean, of course, like reading your own books, I mean, I think it's always fun. The funny thing is that children's books authors actually get invited more than children's books illustrators, and so it's, but I know with my author friends, yes, like when they do school visits and stuff, that's always a lot of fun, to see how kids engage with the story. And they always surprise you with their reactions. They're so honest.
Adrian says, love hearing about all the transitions you've made and are making in your work for your career. Unati had another one. they ask, what inspired your art style and what was your intentional elements that you aimed for?
What inspired my art style? I think that one, I do think that in the beginning, like having more of a graphic design background definitely influenced my art style as an illustrator. So I have a little bit more of a graphic style. Though that's evolving now too, and that has evolved because of like, as I got better in skills, in drawing, then I was able to do things that I couldn't do before. But honestly, my son is the biggest source of inspiration for me. So just observing him and how he is in real life. And that's like a lot of what that daily drawing is too, that's kind of where I get all the funny things, it's just observing him. So, yeah.
And actually, how has or had working as a graphic designer informed, helped, or influenced your illustration work?
I think coming from a graphic design background definitely helps you. For example, if you're going to work on a children's book, you kind of like you understand layout and typography and design, right? And so that kind of can help you, because I do know a lot of children's illustrators who've never had a graphic design background, so they're really thinking purely in artwork, and they can do things that I can't do because I just don't have that kind of illustration training, so I think my graphic design background can be helpful in the sense that like I understand layout, I understand typography and these things. So when I'm working with an art director, we understand each other. I understand what a visual system is, like how we're gonna create a unified visual system for a book, which is in many ways like my old job, creating a unified visual system for a brand. So I get how the art director thinks, and then I also think what else with graphic design has helped. And I would say I had a thought and now I've lost it. Of course, there was another thought that I wanted to add about how graphic design shaped me as an illustrator. But
typography, or color, or something related?
Yeah, typography, color, layout, all of these things for sure. I think that contributes to my style, the way I illustrate. It's a lot of like problem solving. I feel that I still solve problems from like a design point of view, even though I'm doing illustration now. Yeah.
Right. You're getting a handful of words and you're creating a whole image based upon them. Adrian says that ties back into what people were saying, or in the intro, about not knowing what you don't know in our pre-recorded session, and you won't know what you can do or what you ought to do until you try things and notice what inspires you as you go. Caitlin has a question.
Hi, Annie. So it's always, I love learning about like people's career changes, and after hearing that you have a graphic design background, I was wondering if you also had like some illustration skills prior to becoming a children's illustrator, or like you had to learn illustration from the ground to break into this industry.
Yeah, so I think I had zero illustration training. The only drawing that I did was like in high school, because I always loved drawing. So I did take a lot of art classes, and I took art classes in high school and then in college, but it was always fine art, so like pencil sketches or oil or acrylic and things like that. And but never like in actual illustration, which is very different. And commercial illustration is so different from fine art as well. So that was like a steep learning curve for me. And of course, as a graphic designer, like even when I was working at Adobe, I would have to do illustrations, but it was not the same type of illustration. It was not narrative illustration in the sense that you see in a children's book. So that was like quite a steep learning curve for me to know how to do that. And again, that took, a lot of years of, some online art classes, books, and then just like trial and error, trying to figure it out on my own.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I remembered my question. It might be a little controversial, but there have been a lot of celebrities who've written children's books, and they don't illustrate them, of course. And I've seen them on talk shows And like Pat Benatar and her husband Neil Giraldo, who I always hear good things about, but I saw them after I heard about this kind of trend of not ever acknowledging, not even saying the name of the illustrator.
Yeah.
I saw these two who I like on this talk show talking about their book and showing pictures from it. And like, I know it's always harder to write a children's book than most people think, but it's still, I think a lot of celebrities are going to do a lot better writing a children's book rather than illustrating one. So any thoughts on how there's kind of not a lot of credit going around in those situations?
Yeah, I don't know why either. because it's a lot of work to illustrate a 32-page picture book. And yeah, I don't know why there is that imbalance. I think it's because the idea is that it's the author who came up with the idea and the story, and that's the concept, But I mean, the really good picture books, you're going to see that it's very much the illustrator who's taken the text and imagined beyond what was written in a text. There's a real synergy that happens between the words and the images that the artist really does bring another layer, and especially for children's books, where it's really the pictures that are driving the visuals for the kids is what engages them. So yeah, I don't know why there's that imbalance.
Well, maybe you'll correct it. Maybe someday you'll do a celebrity book and we'll see you on the news. I was just thinking, I wonder if there's any actors who've illustrated children's
books. Yes, Keira Knightley just recently. Oh, yeah, she illustrated and wrote her own picture book.
I have to check it out. Well, I just pasted one in that I kind of only found out in the past few years, but Fred Gwynn, who was Herman Munster, and he was in My Cousin Vinny, was a great illustrator, did a bunch of books. Just interesting to see him there. So I pasted in a link for that. And Nichelle says it's an excellent point. The pictures are often more than 50% of the enjoyment. You remember the pictures for a lifetime. Yeah, I mean, it's hand in hand, but you don't just show the images on a big TV and not hear the person who drew them is strange. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up. But Annie, any thoughts about projects you'd like to take on in the future? Like what you'd like to do that you have not had a chance to do yet?
I think I just want to keep honing my craft, so I would just love to keep working on children's books. Every story is different, and it's always such a wonderful process to do that character design, to get to know that character and develop a whole story, So for me, that's really still the goal. I just want to keep working on children's books. And then, like I had mentioned too, exploring other avenues for how I can teach. Right now I've got my guidebook, I've got my LinkedIn writing. I'm doing more of these talks too, which is fun. I'm mentoring, but exploring more of that because I realized that for me, giving back to the community is so important. I find that being freelance artists and designers, you're oftentimes, as you know, alone, and that struggle can be really hard, to do alone. You're so lonely. So I want to try to, give back in any way I can, build community. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
All right. Well, you built some today. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your work. Great to have you, Annie. Hope to see more of you in the future.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for coming today.